everybody, and welcome to the Friday Night Drive Western Suburbs podcast. I'm Josh Welge here with Joe Boenitz, here recording on Tuesday afternoon, October 14th. Joe, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. I'm still trying to recover from all of the crazy finishes that we had across the western suburbs throughout or just last week. So there were plenty of them all throughout. So
Yeah, there was week 7 definitely provided a lot of games where I kind of looked at the score. I'm like, or like I'd get a scoring update from say you, and I'd be like, or I'd show up at a game and a player played that I wasn't expecting to play or wasn't sure if he would play, and just it was one of those weeks where there's a lot going on, a lot of surprises, a lot of good stuff to write about, a lot of good stuff for you and I to talk about. So.
mhm.
It was a fun Friday. I think it's going to be a lot more the next few weeks too. But yeah, I mean, we'll kind of go over last Friday and look at it this week. But I mean, before we get into the games that we're at, I kind of feel like I want to start with a game that was sort of like more than football. Talking about that Rochelle and Canelan game. I mean, I think most people that are listening are probably aware at this point about Rochelle's Dylan Manning in week 6 against Morris. He left the game with a head injury, went to Loyola. He had surgery to relieve pressure on his brain, remove a blood clot. He's still at Loyola. Kudos to the Rochelle football program. They've done a really nice job of providing pretty much daily updates on social media about how Dylan's doing. It sounds like he's making slow and steady progress. He's still at Loyola, but man, Joel, I was thinking last week, I'm like, I don't know how these Rochelle kids can even play a football game right now. I mean, I don't know how they prepare for a football game. I don't know how they even think about football. But they did. Played a game at Canelan. It sounds like it was quite an atmosphere. Kudos to the Canelan side for their part in that, and giving it the necessary gravity. And I know the Rochelle players. I think their coaches were wearing shirts. There's shirts that said, play like Dill. They had the sort of elbow pads with number 10 on them. And then they won the game, which I was just floored to see that result because, even if Dylan Manning was playing in that game, I thought that Canelan would have been a favorite in that game because Canelan's having a great year. But for that Rochelle to go out there and do what they did, with Dylan Manning in the hospital, obviously their thoughts are with him. But for them to go out and play a football game and play it the way they did, it was a 1-point game. But I heard that they had the ball for like 35 out of the 48 minutes in the game. Roman Villalobos, who's a really good fullback, he ran for 3 touchdowns. And I saw a quote of his after the game where, I mean, they weren't even thinking about results. They're just focused on Dylan, but obviously, honoring their star player, they go out and play a whale of a football game.
Yeah, I think, obviously with the emotions being as high as they were, definitely motivated Rochelle to continue to do, what they do best, run the triple play option and, just do whatever they can in order to win that football game. And seemed like they definitely did. I mean, you mentioned it. They had the ball for 35 minutes. They pretty much executed their plan right down to a T. And, to see that sort of result, especially after how tough of a week it had been for that program, it's got to be a really good, feeling for that team, especially, I know obviously playoff implications are probably not big on their mind for that week, but it's such a big win for that program, not only for, the playoff implications, but also for everything that surrounded it this weekend. So kudos to Rochelle for pulling that win off over Canelan there.
I guess maybe I should not be surprised that they play like this because you know what? I mean, I hate to like pontificate here, but sometimes when you're dealing with stuff that's going on in your life, whether it's a friend of yours that is hurt like that or tragedy or whatever. Sometimes what's best is for you to throw yourself into what you do well and what you love to do. And obviously those kids love to play football and they play football well. So again, hats off to the Rochelle kids and their coaches and the Caneland kids for that matter. I mean, it sounded like it was a great atmosphere and a great football game as well.
For sure.
No doubt. Again, a lot of great football last Friday. And Joel, if that Rochelle game was not the most surprising result of the week, I think your game might have been.
Yeah.
I'm not necessarily surprised that Wheaton Warrenville South was able to beat St. Charles North. I kind of feel like they're sort of knocking on the door of the upper echelon of the Duquesne. But man, 33-7 and Owen New York. I mean, the kid just week in and week out puts up huge games, and he did again last Friday.
Yeah, I mean, when you rely on him for 40 carries for 285 yards and 5 touchdowns, I mean, you're going to get a good result out of that. And I think, you kind of mentioned it, the win wasn't as surprising. I mean, this has been a game that's come down to the wire the past 2 seasons. I fully expected that to be the case in this game, but no, it wasn't. It was just pure dominance by Wheaton Warrenville South the entire way through. There was a little bit of time where I thought St. Charles North might crawl back. They had a 78-yard touchdown, and I was like, this may be, the way things turn. But I mean, after that, Wheaton Warrenville South just continued to keep hold of the ball. The third quarter, they only had the ball, or they had the ball for 11 of the 12 minutes in the quarter. It's what they did was it was executed perfectly for Wheaton Warrenville South. And of course, this has been a team that, for the past couple of years, we've kind of been looking and being like, is this going to be the year where they kind of make that jump in the echelon? Obviously, the loss to Geneva earlier this year, it was kind of like, it might be a very similar situation as it was past couple of years where, they'll finish the year 5-4, sneak their way into the playoffs off of playoff points. But this year, especially with that win against St. Charles North, they're really proven that this may actually be their year.
Yeah, I mean, they have had success the last few years, even in the Duquesne Conference. They've been able to get to the playoffs, usually like a 5-4 record, able to just sort of like somehow work their way into the playoffs, and they've had success. But I mean, not to the level of success that they've had, obviously going back in the 90s, and that program's had so much success over the years. But man, I was thinking about it this morning. I'm like, that might be, and I probably would say it is the best win or the biggest win since Sean Norris took over as head coach a handful of years ago for Ron Muich. I mean, that just a really good win for them. And now, puts them in position where they're right there to compete for the Duquesne Conference title. And on the other side, St. Charles North, I mean, again, I didn't expect them to lose like this, but I will say they've been kind of playing things a little bit kind of, edge of the seat of their pants, kind of rolling the dice a little bit. They played a lot of close games. That Minooka game, they kind of pulled a rabbit out of their hat. I mean, the Batavia game, the way it did, even the St. Charles East game was a pretty close game, a little bit more close than we expected. So again, the fact that they lost the game, not that surprised, but the fact that they lost the way they did, maybe a little more surprised. And, maybe it's not the worst thing in the world for them that they lost a game like that.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a big wake-up call for them, especially considering how they weren't able to come back like they have been able to in those games that you kind of mentioned, like in Minooka and then Batavia. So having a loss like that is definitely not the worst thing in the world for this team. And I think especially considering, how they're ending off the season, it's definitely going to be a good thing for the future for them.
Yeah, I mean, Geneva too. That was another close game, and they've
Yes.
it feels like they've played nothing but close games. Except, of course, last Friday's game was not a close game at all. So, so yeah, but great win for Wheaton Warrenville South. A very good win for them. So good deal for them. Game that I was at last Friday, Downsgrove North and York, and really the story of that game was Owen Lansu, Downsgrove North senior quarterback, going to Minnesota. He broke his left arm, which is his non-throwing arm, in the first believe it was the first quarter of week 2 against Downers Grove South. And it's sort of like been the elephant in the room surrounding that program for the last month or so is when is Owen Lanzu, going to return? Is he going to return? I mean, it's not like it's just a bruised hand or whatever. I mean, I know he's right-handed, but it's still a broken arm. And I'd heard from another reporter of ours, Scott Schmidt, that he had heard that, maybe week 7 or week 8 he could return. And obviously last week was week 7, but sure enough, I showed up and he's warming up. And I'm like, all right, here we go. So it sounds like he was cleared by doctors to play on Wednesday of last week. And man, you wonder after a guy has been out for a month, I mean, are they going to kind of, ease him back in, keep the training wheels on? But man, they sure did not do that. I mean, the first pass that he threw was a 42-yarder to Will Val, who's going to Illinois, just on a dime, deep ball. Second pass was a touchdown pass to Oliver Thulin, and they were off to the races. 388 yards and 4 touchdowns. And man, he just did not show any rust whatsoever with that deep ball. He was going deep ball after deep ball after deep ball. And it's funny, I was talking to him and Oliver Thulin afterwards, and they're like, he's been working out. He's been throwing, and maybe not full practice until last week, but he's been throwing because, again, he's a right-handed quarterback. The left arm is the one that's hurt. So he can still throw the ball. So maybe I shouldn't have been that surprised that he was not rusty at all. But still, I mean, God, first game action in 5 weeks. I mean, how could he not? I mean, just what a great performance by him.
Yeah, that was definitely a good way to, come back into the scene and be like, hey, I'm still here. We're all good. And I mean, I think it comes at a perfect time for Downers Grove North. I mean, obviously they're 6-1 now. And, who knows what could have happened if they ran, what they had been for the past couple of weeks. They could be a 6-3 team heading into the playoffs, but now they're looking like they got a really good shot at being that 8-1 team and hosting, playoff team heading into the playoffs. And, I think it's definitely a really good sign for them that he really hasn't lost his or that Lancer hasn't lost his step back at quarterback. And, now I'm sure a bunch of teams in 7A are looking at that result and just being like, oh boy, I don't want to face them in the second round or the quarterfinals or at any point. So it's definitely a really big win, not only to have Lancer back, but also to beat York the way that they did.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, they were a team that in the preseason, I think they're sort of in the short list of teams to watch in 7A. I think they were ranked, tied for number 1 in 7A rankings at one point. But when he went down, it's kind of like, my expectations and thought about them was a little tempered because they really became sort of let's really rely on our defense and run the ball a whole lot because they had Kevin Jay, who's a running back, a former quarterback, but basically a running back playing quarterback. And I thought they, without Owen Lancer, they're a team that I thought, okay, they'll still make the playoffs, but limited about what they can do once they get there. Now with him back, I mean, all bets are off. I think they're a very dangerous opponent going forward. One thing I will say is their lineman, Aiden Selecki, that's going to Purdue, 2A lineman. He left that game in the first half with a leg injury, like around the knee. He did not return. Their coach, Joe Hereni, said afterwards he was pretty optimistic. I guess he went to the hospital, came back, and he said, we got good news. I mean, he didn't really commit to what that good news was, but he felt like Aiden Selecki would be okay. But that's definitely something to watch because their defense is just not the same when he's not on the field. I mean, he's a big lineman. He also plays offense as well. So definitely something to watch going forward. But Downers Grove North, great win for them last Friday. It was really fun to see Owen Lanzu back on the field for them. Before we kind of take a break and look at the next week, another unbeaten. There was actually a fair amount of unbeatens went down last Friday. I think like that started last Friday with 45. I think we're down to like 35 or 36. Another one that went down in our neck of the woods was Yorkville. Oswego East beat them 28-17. And really, similar to Owen York with big games, Josiah Watson, he put up 253 yards and 3 touchdowns. It's his third game that he's been either over 200 or right around 200 yards. He's a kid that missed, I think, 6 or 7 games last last year with injury and sickness, and he's just come back. He's already over 1,000 yards with 3 games left in season. But it's interesting. I talked to one of their linemen, their left tackle Jeremiah Smith, and there were some really question marks about Oswego East and their line going into the year because they graduated 2 starters. One of them, Zach Marshall, is now at NIU. They had 2 other kids that were linemen from last year that decided not to come back for football. So just a real question mark surrounding their offensive line going into the season. And they've answered. They have answered the bell. They're 6-1. They've clinched the playoffs after missing the last couple of years. And a big reason for that is Josiah Watson and that offensive line.
Yeah, and I think, heading into that game, we kind of mentioned it is like it was going to be a battle between which dominant power was going to, take that victory. Was it going to be Oswego East's offense or Yorkville's defense? And for once in the Southwest Prairie, it was the offense that came out on top. So, to see that sort of thing happen with with Oswego East, it's definitely a good sign for them. It's definitely a good thing for them.
Definitely. Great win for them. Yeah, I think we're going to take a quick break, hear from our sponsors. When we get back, we will look ahead to week 8.
SGKR Injury Attorneys tackles the toughest cases. I'm Matt Rundio. When life throws a flag, we go on offense to protect your rights. Don't get sidelined. Score a touchdown with SGKR. Visit us at sgkr.law.
At Oliver's, we are proud to serve our community. We serve up great customer service, quality products, ease of shopping, and we serve up delicious barbecued sandwiches at our fundraiser cookouts. So stop by Oliver's, 748 North Brenton and Dixon, and help fund our local clubs and events.
In Illinois and into Iowa, the story of Shaw Media is a story of trust. Since 1851, we've been informing, connecting, and reflecting the communities we serve, large and small, rural and urban, suburban, and river towns alike. With dozens of local newspapers, radio stations, magazines, and specialty brands like Friday Night Drive and Starve Rock Country, we meet people wherever they are. We shine a light on local government. We celebrate Friday night touchdowns. We tell the stories that shape your day, from neighborhood heroes to the Chicago Bears. But what truly sets us apart? It's our people. The award-winning journalists, broadcasters, and storytellers who live here, work here, and care deeply about what matters most to you. We don't just report the news. We're part of the fabric of the places we serve, from the Mississippi to the Illinois, from the Fox all the way to the chain of lakes. Trusted for generations, still earning it every day. Shaw Media, your most trusted local source.
Back on the Friday Night Drive Western Suburbs podcast, we turn our attention to week 8. And Joel, I think I'll start with a game that I'm going to be on Friday. Oswego East, I believe it's a 21st crosstown game. Oswego really long dominated that series. I think they won the first 15 or so. Oswego East beat them for the first time in the spring COVID weird season that we had. It was actually at West Aurora. I mean, that's how strange it was. But then Oswego East did beat them again a few years ago to knock Oswego out of playoff contention. But interesting, this is one of the very few occasions where I go into this game and I feel a little bit more certain about Oswego East and what they're trying to do, because again, their offense has been really well run into football. They always play pretty good defense. And Oswego, quite frankly, the last few weeks, they started out 4-0, but their last 2 games in the Southwest Prairie West, Yorkville shut them out into the fourth quarter. And then last Friday, Minooka beat them 10-3. So they only had to 1 field goal. And their offense has really struggled the last few weeks. And so again, I with this game, it's kind of like what I think is going to happen. It doesn't necessarily happen. But that being said, I definitely have a little bit more certainty about what Oswego East is trying to do. I think Oswego, for them offensively, the last time I saw him, Teddy Manikis, who's a really good receiver, he only had 1 catch. They need to get him the ball. And then they obviously would love to establish a run as well.
Yeah, I think it's really weird, especially with how the Southwest Prairie Conference is kind of, working out in these later halves. I don't think either of us expected Oswego to be one of the 4 teams that weren't 2-1 heading into this week.
No,
not at all. Yeah, so I think this is definitely going to be a good this is definitely going to be a big momentum shifter for both of these teams. I think if Oswego East can continue, its work on its offense and, get a big win against Oswego, sets them up really well heading into the playoffs. And I mean, for the other side, for Oswego, they get this win over St. Charles East, what the heck, Oswego East. It's definitely going to be a big, momentum shift for them as well, especially if they get that work on the offense, or if they have it kind of like they had in the early parts of the season, especially against teams like Geneva.
Yeah, I don't really know what to make of either side of the Southwest Prairie Conference. I'm sure our colleague Steve Susi would agree with us. I mean, you look at just the SBC West. I mean, there's 5 teams right now that have either 5 or 6 wins, so they're almost certainly going to the playoffs. I mean, Plainfield North is 2-5, but they get a couple wins. They have pretty good playoff points, and they could be 6 for 6 teams in the playoffs. But I don't know who the best team in that league is, and I don't know who the 4th best team in that league is, because it's like Oswego East beats Yorkville, and then Yorkville beats Minooka, and then Minooka beats Oswego, but Oswego blows out Bolingbrook, but then Bolingbrook does the same to Oswego East. I mean, it's just like a lot of pretty good teams just kind of beating up on each other.
Yeah, it seems like every single time that we kind of have a beat on who is the best team in the league, they lose to somebody else. And we're just like, well, there goes everything that we thought we knew about this league. So no, it's definitely going to be fun to see how, the standings shake out in the conference standings over the next 2 weeks.
Yeah. Similar situation in the Duquesne Conference where, I mean, right now I'm looking at it. We got 3 teams that are 4-1. St. Charles North, Batavia, Wheaton, Warrenville South.
Mm-hmm.
And there's that little Glenmar North team that is kind of been, sort of on a periphery on our radar throughout the year. Now they got St. Charles North coming in. Man, tough matchup for St. Charles North coming off of that loss to Wheaton, Warrenville South, because they struggled to stop the run against Wheaton South. And Glenmar North is going to be running that football.
Yeah, I mean, they have a very talented running back. Once again, you got Donato Gatsis, who I believe has only had 1 game with less than 100 rushing yards. And I believe every other game that he's had, it's been over 160 yards on the ground. They rely on him quite a bit in that contest. And I think for St. Charles North, it's going to be okay, how do we respond to the loss to Wheaton Warrenville South? And more importantly, how do we stop the run? Because, it was kind of talked about on the Friday Night Drive podcast with Steve Susi and Matt Rudewald. If you can't stop the run in Class 7A, it might be a problem for you whenever it comes to the playoffs. So this is definitely going to be a really big test for both of these teams. I mean, if Glenmar North gets a win, they shake up the conference standings even more and, potentially sets up a conference decider in week 9 for Wheaton, Warrenville South, and Batavia. So that's going to be a pretty big game for not only, playoff standings, but also conference standings as well.
No doubt. I already know where you're going to be week 9 at Wheaton, Warrenville South.
Yep.
Congratulations for that one. That's for sure. But, another game in the Duquesne Conference this Friday that I know you and I are both going to be having our eyes is that Geneva Wheaton North game. I mean, I don't know if we expected Geneva to be what they were last year, but man, they are fighting for their playoff lives right now after that loss to Glenmar North last week. And I mean, they really need a win this week with Wheaton North this week.
Yeah, and I mean, we kind of talked about it. They've suffered a lot of close losses this year. I mean, 3 of their 4 losses have been decided by a field goal. The last 2 have been decided on last-second field goals as well. So, it's definitely not been, the best break for them, but they've shown throughout that they're able to stay within these games and stay within striking distance. And I think, over these next 2 weeks, it's going to be important to see if they can kind of surge ahead in those games and have that sort of dominance that they had whenever it comes to controlling the time and, establishing possession, because that's how they were able to beat teams like Wheaton Warrenville South, is establishing that possession throughout the contest. So I think if they're able to do that, it should be good. This game last year was very interesting, even though the 2 teams were on completely different levels. Seems like they might be on more similar levels this year, so we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. At Wheaton North, it's been a real struggle for Wheaton North since they got in the Duquesne Conference. I think they've had a number of injuries, and it's been a struggle for them. But obviously, Geneva needs that game, and then they're going to need Week 9 against St. Charles East, who's they've been sneaking competitive the last few weeks in particular. So that is by no means a gimme for Geneva in Week 9.
For sure, especially with the growing confidence that St. Charles East has in their sophomore quarterback. I believe Cruz Herrera has like 16 passing touchdowns this year, which I'd say is pretty good, especially considering some of the standards of quarterback in the Duquesne Conference. I think he's in the upper echelon of that touchdown ranking this year. So it's certainly not a gimme over these next 2 weeks. So it's going to be really big for Geneva if they want to win out.
Big game in the West Suburban Silver this Friday. Well, Downers go North is at Lions, which is a good one as well. But that Glenbard West at York game, Glenbard West, pretty much for all intents and purposes, can lock up the West Suburban Silver title with a win. They're 7-0 now. They just continue to roll. Huge game last week for Jamarcus Kelly beating Hinsdale Central. They just got everything going right now. And York, I got some questions about them after last week because they really struggled to defend against Downers Grove North. And also, I didn't note this earlier, their starting quarterback, Dominic Alfano, he went down with an injury in the last minute of the first half against Downers Grove North. He did not return. His backup, Zach Assad, did a pretty good job. He actually led a touchdown drive at the end of the first half, and he played pretty well in the second half. But obviously, Dom Alfano is their starter. So not quite sure the extent of that injury and if he's going to be available this week. So that's a big question for York. But man, talk about, wow, tough loss to Downers Grove North. Well, who do we have next? Oh, Glenbard West coming in. Thus is life in the West Suburban Silver.
Yeah, and I mean, Glenbard West is in a short list of, teams in either 7A or 8A who are still undefeated. I believe there's only 4 teams between those two. Yeah, only 4 teams between those two classes that are undefeated, and Glenbard West is one of them. So, it's certainly by no means, going to be an easy game for either of these teams. And, for York, obviously, we've mentioned it. They're going through a gauntlet right now for their schedule. Losing their starting quarterback is definitely not the thing that you want to do at this time of year. But, it's definitely going to be a fight to the end, and it's going to be interesting to see which side comes out on top.
No doubt about that. Glenbard West playing at York. Another game on Friday that I'll be watching, and you'll be watching personally because you'll be there. Wheaton Academy is going to be playing Aurora Christian. Wheaton Academy, similar to Geneva. They've been to the playoffs the last couple of years. They reached quarterfinals 2 years ago, but now they're in that 3 and 4 position. And now they have to go to Aurora Christian, which is probably not a great place to be when you're in a tough situation, because Aurora Christian is playing great, and it sounds like they have a great quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, Wheaton Academy has not been to the playoffs under Jim Johannick yet. I mean, they're usually a team that has 8 wins by the end of the season. They're usually pretty high seed in whichever class they end up in. And to see them be on the brink of missing the playoffs at this point of the year, it's kind of shocking to see. And, you kind of mentioned it. They don't have the easiest task in facing Aurora Christian this week. I mean, I believe the Eagles have scored 40 plus points in 6 of their 7 games this year, and that includes their 2 losses to Hope Academy and Bishop McNamara, who are both undefeated still. So, it's definitely going to be a big test for both sides. And yeah, it's going to be really fun to see in person.
Yeah, Wheaton Academy's been a little bit of the victim of the tricky scheduling that goes on right now, because they had the losses the last couple of weeks in conference to Hope Academy and Bishop McNamara, who look like the best 2 teams in that league. But then earlier in the year, they played Providence week 1. They lost that game. Okay, Providence is pretty similar to them in enrollment wise. I know they played each other in playoffs a few years ago, but then they had to find a team in Grand Rapids, Michigan to play in week 2, and they lose that game. So next thing you know, you're sitting at 0-2. Yes, you can overcome that. They've overcome a loss earlier in the year in previous years to get to the playoffs. But man, that's tough. You're putting yourself behind the 8 ball right off the bat, 0-2, and then if you have some tough teams in your league, well, then you're sitting here 3-4.
Yeah, and of course now you got to face another tough team who has a really good offense. So it's just like it's just kind of a thing where it's like, what else can you do at this point? So
yeah, it'll be interesting to watch that game on Friday. I mean, I know 3-4, 5-2. I expect a really competitive game. I know Wheaton Academy, they were kind of rebuilding a little bit this year. They had a little bit of a younger team. So I think it's probably not expected that they're, sort of a 500 team at this point, but still obviously a big game for them this Friday. A team, that is not struggling, that doesn't need to fight for their playoff lives right now. We haven't really talked about it much on this podcast. Maybe we should. Riverside Brookfield is 7-0. I did some research. Kudos to the IHSA. They're pretty good website where you can go back and look at past results. And I was kind of wondering, like, when was the last time Riverside Brookfield was 7-0? You have to go all the way back to 2001 when they reached the Class 3A quarterfinal or Class 5A quarterfinals. Their head coach back then was Otto Zeman, and I know Matt and Seuss on their podcast, they talked about it. Otto Zeman and Riverside Brookfield, they did the 5 wides, throw it all over the place before everybody did it. I mean, they sort of revolutionized the way offenses were in Illinois to a certain extent. And but anyway, they have not been 7-0 since that time. They've been through probably a half a dozen leagues. They've been a bit of a nomad, but now they're 7-0. They're rotating 2 junior quarterbacks, Braden Novak, Giancarlo Garcia, and they've just been rolling. They had a good win. I think they beat Wakanda earlier in the year, which was a really good win for them. They beat Glenbard South a couple weeks ago. They were down. They got a big one week 9, Glenbard East, which will probably decide the Upstate 8 East title. They got a tough one this week. West Chicago is another team that needs a win to keep its playoff hopes on track. So, but Riverside Brookfield, keep an eye on them in that 5A, 6A range.
yeah, and I mean, you kind of mentioned it. These next 2 weeks are going to be pretty tough for them. Obviously, West Chicago, they can go off for 60 points any given week with their triple option offense. And of course, Glenbard East has kind of been, the upper echelon of the Upstate 8 for many years. So, those are 2 really tough tests for Riverside Brookfield. And considering how tough, that Class 5A is, Class 6A, both of those areas, getting wins against those 2 programs are definitely going to be really good for them heading into the postseason. So.
Yeah, and they're a team, similar to a Yorkville, similar to an Oswego East, where, I mean, they were 4-5 last year and missed the playoffs. So really modest expectations for that team coming into the year. I'm not surprised that they have a winning record. Am I surprised they're 7-0? Yes, I am surprised that they're 7-0. But hats off to them. They've had a great year so far, and we'll be following them going forward. Joe, before we get out of here, any other games that you're, going to be kind of scoreboard watching on Friday?
One I'm definitely going to be watching, we kind of mentioned it, Duquesne Conference. I'm going to be watching that Wheaton-Warrenville South and Lake Park game. I mean, Lake Park is coming off a pretty big win against St. Charles East. They're rolling out a new quarterback actually over there. He threw for 293 yards and I believe 4 touchdowns as well. So, pretty good first varsity game under center. We'll see if Wheaton-Warrenville South's defense can continue to kind of hold that firm, and if that's the case, I think we'll definitely be having a matchup for a conference title in week 9. So that's definitely going to be something that I'm going to be watching.
Yeah, I know Lake Park, you mentioned they have a new quarterback. They have a pretty good receiver, though, if I'm not mistaken, to throw.
Yeah,
I know that kid. I'm losing the name, but it seems like every week he has a big week for them.
Yeah, Nico Menos. I think he had. Yeah, he had 200 yards. He had the game-winning touchdown catch with, I believe, 8 seconds left in that contest. So, it's definitely a really reliable set of hands for that team, and he has been for, I believe, or for definitely this year and also last year as well. So, it's going to be interesting to see if Wheaton-Warrenville South can contain that new air attack for them.
Yeah, definitely. a lot of good stuff going on. A lot of good stuff coming up on Friday Night Drive. I'll be back here tomorrow to talk to Seuss to look at all the games, big games around the state. Of course, Seuss is going to be on with Mason Schweizer to talk about football in the Kankakee area. I'm sure they'll be talking about that Bishop Mack Hope Academy game this Friday. And then Seuss will be back with Matt on Friday night. Of course, JT and Eddie will be talking South and West football on Thursday. We're going to get out of here. Again, for Joe Boenitz and Josh Welge, thanks for listening. Everyone have a great week and a great